So today we have Bill Raukko, and usually I would say that he's going to do a lay witness, but he's not doing a lay witness. He is going to do a sermon that he has prepared in our sermon writing group and lay witness group. I'll remind you again that in the long history of Christianity, one of the most important aspects is laity having the opportunity to tell their story and to add their experience to the Christian understanding of how it is that God interacts with his people. Bill is a great speaker, but what makes him great is not rhetorical concept. It is because he is a practicing Christian. So as he speaks to us today, he'll speak from the heart, and I would encourage and invite you to open your heart to his story as well as your own. Bill, are you ready? He hates it when I give introductions like that. He would prefer I just say, ladies and gentlemen, Bill Raukko. So, ladies and gentlemen, Bill Raukko.
Hello, my name is Bill, and I am a narcissist. I am working to overcome it, to grow out of it by surrendering to God's will and accepting that the path is difficult. I learned about various personality disorders in high school. That's when I first heard the ancient Greek legend of Narcissus, the son of gods who was a hunter and blessed with great beauty. His overwhelming pride was demonstrated by disdaining those who loved him. Seeing his reflection in a pool of water, he fell in love with his own image. Unable to leave the beauty of his reflection, he lost his will to live and remained there until he died. A personality disorder is named for this mythical character. When I learned of this and other disorders in high school, I saw narcissism as something rare and seldom encountered. One of those things to be attributed to crazy people, folks who are clearly nuts. I've learned I was wrong. Jill, my first wife, whom I lost 10 years ago, often told me that I was self-centered and only interested in myself. This hit home with me. I'm an introvert, most comfortable when I am alone and doing things like working on antique radios, fly fishing, watching TV, all solitary activities. I tried to be more social like Jill. Maybe I have succeeded somewhat. In my career, I rose to be a manager of engineers and was seen as the one who knew how to talk to people. Of course, the people making that assessment in my workplace were mostly engineers themselves. Electrical engineering is where introverts congregate. It didn't take much to be perceived as the outgoing one. I am doubly cursed as an introvert because I am both an electrical engineer and of Finnish heritage. Finnish men are legend as introverts in Europe. There is a story about both EEs and Finns, and it goes like this. If you approach a group of Finnish men gathered together at a small group in a party, how will you know which one is the extrovert? Answer, he'll be the one looking at your shoes. After I lost Jill and had moved here and joined this church, I attended Grief Share and have served as a lay leader of that ministry. Over the 7 years that I have been a leader, I have interacted with over 200 grieving people. As good as this program is, it has not worked for everyone. We have occasionally had folks who were not moving forward in their grief. In a few instances, I took this as a failure on my part. As we do when our church work distresses us, I called on Pastor Steve for help. In a few cases, Steve concluded that the issues of these individuals were beyond the scope of Grief Share. We were not going to win them all. I also learned that the likely problem was that a few of these folks were seriously narcissistic. But then I became aware of something troubling. I realized that one of the reasons I was taking it so hard was that these folks, one in particular, reminded me of Jill in many ways. So I began researching narcissism. Online, you can find tests to evaluate yourself to see if you are a narcissist. So, of course, I took a few tests to see where I stood, recalling the times when Jill talked about my self-centered nature. But what drove me to that internet was that a few of these folks in GriefShare had reminded me of Jill, and I recognized examples of Jill's behavior in some questions. So, trying to imagine that I was she, I took the test. Not the best idea, obviously. Jill is not here to answer for herself, and there's no way I can do this objectively. But knowing this, I persisted anyway. There are several testing tools available online. You can go there yourself to check them out if you're interested. But the one I was drawn to scores narcissism on a 1 to 10 scale, 10 for the most narcissistic. My score came out a 4. Jill was an 8. You might think that I was finding this satisfying. I was not. I was alarming. Alarming to realize that I was narcissistic in some ways, and more alarming to discover that Jill might have had some severe issues. I tried to juice the answers, being more critical of myself and as biased as possible in Jill's favor. But I could not move my score, and I could only honestly move Jill's score down to a 7. If you are a 1 or a 2, you have nothing to worry about. Not much narcissism there. We all have egos, and self-preservation will put us at a 1 or a 2. 3 or 4, and you have some serious personality traits, some annoying personality traits. 5, 6, or 7, you probably often make people uncomfortable with your self-centeredness. 7 and 8, it's getting serious. 9 and 10, NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, a clinical condition. Before I go on, a disclaimer. I spent weeks and weeks on this. If you go home and spend 20 minutes and evaluate your wife using one of these online tests, you will likely both be wrong and in trouble. Many experts refer to these online tests as junk tests, and for a number of tests, this is true. I stopped Pastor Steve in the hallway after a meeting, and I told him I was learning some things about myself and about my first marriage, and he obviously read my anxiety and cut me off short. He asked me to call and make an appointment to see him. We were not going to resolve this in a few minutes in the hall. My 1-hour meeting with Steve turned into a counseling session. Not what I thought was going to happen. Steve asked me a few questions about my first marriage and our relationship, and then asked a big one. He asked me if I understood the gifting cycle of an abusive relationship. My first reaction, remembering that in my life I had known of a few abusive husbands, was that I never abused Jill. But within seconds, I realized he was not tagging me as the abuser. He was suggesting that I had been emotionally abused. As we talked more, I realized he was right. Very hard for me to admit. An assault on my manhood. Without knowing the scoring details of my research, Steve also offered that from what little I was able to tell him in an hour's time, Jill was probably an 8 on the 1 to 10 narcissism scale, just as I had seen when I played around with the online testing. By the way, narcissism has little to do with extroverts versus introverts. As weeks and months rolled by, I would go back to the internet and further research the subject. I learned that a narcissist will find a mate she can control. I realized that my parents had serious narcissistic tendencies, especially my dad. I have long believed that my dad was bipolar as well. So these things get complicated. Complicated when you venture into psychology, especially when you're a novice like me. From my childhood, I had become accustomed to being controlled. Meeting, dating, and marrying Jill was consistent. This can sound like I am doing what I have often criticized, finding excuses for my failures in my childhood, not having control over my own life. Maybe. But I do not hold anyone responsible for my problems. Life is full of challenges, and we all have choices. And all of these things ultimately make us stronger. I do not blame Jill, nor hold her responsible. If I had not chosen to ignore our problems and purposely distract myself and sought counseling instead, maybe I could have changed things, made our lives richer, better. Maybe it's because of my own narcissism that I avoided counseling, because I did not want to admit that there was something terribly wrong. So you see, there is truth in my opening statement. In many ways, I am a narcissist. On the internet, you can find postings from people who talk about failed relationships with narcissists, who claim to be happy to have dumped them. They describe their former significant other in very accusing, mean, and downright nasty terms. I cannot do that. I could never do that. I love Jill, and I cannot blame her. We shared the relationship, and despite using her affection, and I'll say it, lust to control me, and despite my sins, we shared the responsibility. It was up to me to take action, and I did not. I did not answer the call, choosing instead to ignore it and suffer through it for all those years. Exodus chapter 3, verse 13. Moses said to God, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' Then what shall I tell them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am." Luke chapter 18, verse 10. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, "God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and I give a tenth of all I get." But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to the heavens, but beat his breast and said, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner." On the internet, I found lists of the signs of NPD. With all the nuances, it's easy to get lost in the details. So I will summarize and point out a few examples significant to my experience. Narcissists are really self-hating on the outside. They can't love their true selves, so they fall in love with a reflection of themselves. Jill and I presented an image of ourselves to the outside world that had to be maintained at all costs. I was always stressed by this, and I know that Jill was too. Her stress and anxiety were overwhelming. Narcissists appear to be control freaks, but are really in constant fear of losing control. Control is necessary to feel powerful, so they seek it. Although an image of self-control is presented to the outside world, narcissists are impulsive. It takes money to maintain a false image, to surround yourself with all the symbols of wealth, all those things to worship and to be worshiped by others. Jill lived for parties, and we hosted a lot of them, all opportunities to show off her beautiful home. Every holiday provided a reason, and a party was always followed by planning for the next one. A grandiose fantasy causes narcissists to believe that they have more money than they actually have and leads to reckless spending. Shopping sprees become a search for comfort, and spending leads to debt and the demand for more money. We were always dealing with large credit card balances. I abhorred this type of debt and was always struggling to find ways to avoid it. And typically, the only answer when Jill and I would discuss the problem was for me to find ways to make more money. Boasting builds a grandiose image because of a lack of self-esteem. Boasting is a means of compensation and masks the narcissist's lack of self-worth. Narcissists are jealous and envious. They want anything that another has and try to get it. And they have a strong belief that others envy them. Narcissists find ways to talk about themselves. Knowing that this will be a turnoff to others, they are masters at artfully and gracefully turning the conversation back to them. Narcissists are proud. They have an extreme sensitivity to criticism. They will have a haughty reaction to anybody who threatens their false selves, their constructed image. Anybody in opposition is judged an inferior and deserving retribution. How dare you? Shortcomings cannot be faced without shame. Rage is often the result of perceived criticism. When efforts to maintain the image with soft-talking fail, all control is lost, and the narcissism will resort to rage, threats, anger. Jill and I argued a lot, arguments that resolved nothing. From a biblical perspective, they are blasphemous. In a sense, they see themselves as godlike. They cannot stand being upstaged. Another cannot be seen as being more powerful, beautiful, intelligent, more anything. The rival or enemy must be spoken down. Their ego is fragile, easily offended, even when no offense was intended. A narcissist finds it difficult to be truly thankful, feeling that others should thank them. Often, they will serve others because they anticipate and crave the obligatory thanks. When appreciation is not received, they will hold grudges for a very long time. Narcissists find it very difficult to forgive even themselves. They cannot face their own shortcomings without shame. Narcissists grow up feeling unloved. They are suspicious of their own feelings and see displays of affection as weakness in others, a weakness they can exploit. A narcissist will work hard early in the relationship to make their target feel safe and secure. The target or partner fills the need of the narcissist to control someone. The need to feel powerful leads to verbal and emotional abuse in the relationship. A truly authentic relationship is not the top priority. When the target decides to end the one-sided relationship, he is seen as a traitor and deemed worthy of abuse and even annihilation. Narcissists rationalize that rules do not apply to them and morally wrong actions are justifiable. I was guilty of this, excusing my sinful behavior in my attempts to relieve the stress of our marriage. Did any of this sting a little bit? I'm sorry, but this is truth. Someone who is NPD would demonstrate many of these behaviors, but aren't we all guilty of some of them? As I read through these symptoms, how many of you, either seriously or lightheartedly, are nudging with your elbow the person who came with you this morning? It's always easier to see the defects in another and difficult to acknowledge them in ourselves, especially if we attend to the narcissistic. For one of the characteristics of a narcissist is to see all problems as the fault of others. We narcissists are perfect, or at least close. As is typical of narcissistic behavior, Jill was two personalities. She could be loving and compassionate and sincerely so, but often, especially under stress, she would change significantly. But the sweet, loving, caring personality was always on display for others. It was at home and around family that she would break down. Her stress and anxiety were overwhelming. It was difficult to be around her. But for others, the image had to be preserved. Anything that damaged that image had to be protected, hidden. And even in our serving others through our church, which Jill did in greater measure than I did, I often wondered, was it done in service to the Lord, or was it part of building and defending an image to be seen by others? So, with regard to that nudging, who is the more narcissistic? The one being nudged, or the one doing the poking with his or her elbow? 30 years ago, despite my job as a technical manager with one of the best companies in the business, Jill and I were struggling with preparations to pay for 2 kids in college. And we had not saved and invested for our own retirement. Approaching age 50, our time was running out. Unable to put together and execute a plan, I suggested to Jill, as I had in prior years, that we see a financial counselor. Jill always resisted, and her objection at the time was that the counselors I had suggested were all men. She felt that a man would see the disagreements my way, the guys ganging up on her. So when Sue, one of our close friends, was widowed and had a good experience with a female financial counselor, I suggested that we see Betsy. With Sue's solid recommendation, Jill agreed to the appointment. Betsy had us prepare a summary of our financial status and filled out a questionnaire describing our goals and lifestyle preferences. She then went to work analyzing the information and prepared a plan. I was responsible for a sizable budget at work, part of my job as a manager. I knew how to do financial planning in business and the kind of discipline that was involved in long-term financial management. But I was ready to make concessions if we could agree to a working plan. And I was not surprised by the result of Betsy's work. We met with Betsy for the final presentation. The meeting was scheduled for an hour. We went on for an hour and a half, and we had to schedule a follow-up because we could not finish. And Jill cried from the moment Betsy got into the recommendations until the end of the meeting. I should have realized there were more serious issues than finances, but I just did not want to admit it, I guess. When I look back now, I realize it was past time for some serious counseling. I should have taken action, found someone to counsel us in our marriage, dig deeper into our problems, but I did not. I am an engineer and I was a manager. I was paid to solve technical problems and to deal with people issues in my group, and by and large, I did well at it. But I failed to address the most important problem in my life, my marriage. It is a sign of my own narcissism that I would not face up to the reality that I had too much pride to seek the help that we needed. We all need an ego for self-preservation, for survival. We need to take care of ourselves. We watch the ads on TV that tell us we deserve the good things in life and that we should acquire the best for ourselves. But at what point do we cross the line into a level of narcissism that is no longer healthy or no longer pleasing to God? When I was reading the scripture from Luke, did you identify with the tax collector? I do. But am I not also the Pharisee? Recent research, including extensive interviews with narcissists, has shown that they know who and what they are. We narcissists are aware of how we are behaving, what we are doing. We like it. A narcissist justifies his behavior, feels he deserves to behave this way. The behavior is done to feed a sensitive, damaged ego. And narcissists are very difficult to cure. When pressure to change, necessary for any disorder, reaches the tipping point, the narcissist can turn on the counselor or his own family to the point of serious violence. I take heart in learning this. Maybe it's foolish to think that there was anything I could have done. And I love Jill anyway. I could never seriously consider leaving her. When you write those notes or letters or emails during the Christmas holidays, do you brag about what your children and grandchildren have done? Or do you write about who they are becoming as they grow older? What news are you eager to tell your friends? And why? Something to think about, isn't it? As an engineer, I was taught techniques during my career for analyzing and solving complex technical problems. One of the first steps was to define the problem at hand. Sounds like an overly simple statement, but often a problem is not solved because it was not understood at the beginning. Sometimes the chosen corrective action created a change that did not address the real problem. One exercise is to make a 2-column list with the headings, what it is and what it is not, to help clarify the challenge. Well, this is a very short list. On the is side, I am who I am. And on the is not side, I am not. Narcissism really comes down to that, doesn't it? All the Bible stories, the commandments, the inspirations, failures, sacrifices, conversions, it all comes down to who God is and who we are not. Sometimes the lessons of life are really tough, but in the depravity of my life, at the lowest point of my grief, God did not give up on me. I had given up on him and on my marriage years earlier, but God did not give up on me. I tried over and over again for 30 years of my marriage to do what I thought Jill wanted and to make her happy. And over again, the delight was short-lived, only to be followed by the next desire, the next gift, the next sacrifice, trying to find happiness and always failing. It's interesting that the preparers of the Declaration of Independence used the phrase, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit, not happiness, the pursuit. I believe they understood that we could have the right to pursue, but we would never achieve it. Life is always full of pain, but it can and does include joy. We won't avoid pain for any significant time, but we can have joy in the midst of it. Why do I write these sermons and testify to you about my mistakes, my failures? Because I have learned with God's help and from others, like many of you in this church, how to find peace and joy in serving the Lord. And I want to give you the benefit of what I have learned from all of this, and hopefully at least one person will recognize the opportunity for a richer, better life and maybe avoid my mistakes. I think that is why Jesus encouraged us to testify to our faith, so that we can be both of service and a resource to each other. I learned when Jill was dying how precious each remaining moment was, each moment with her. And after she passed, I realized that all life's moments are precious. Those I have allowed to be wasted in the past and those remaining. I can do something about those remaining. And for this I am grateful. Grateful that God has given me more time. Despite my dad's issues and his limited education and relatively low status in life, he valued reading. He was familiar with only a few poems, but one of his favorites was Longfellow's The Village Blacksmith. It tells of a widowed blacksmith who daily puts in his time doing his job, firing iron and pounding it into shape. He grieves for his wife each Sunday in worship and prays regularly. His connection to the Lord suggests both Jesus' lessons of humility and God's role as our blacksmith, firing each of us in a forge of life by fire and hammer, shaping something crude and rough into a useful and beautiful thing. That's how I see myself. I have learned how basically useless I have been. The failures of my life have taught me humility, and that I am not and can never be fully in control. I cannot change the past, but I can offer myself to God, narcissism and all. He is in control, and he will reshape. He is in control, and he will reshape this piece of something useless that I am into that which will serve him. He continues to change me. And I am grateful for all the fire and all the pounding and all the reshaping, and for the remaining time that he has allowed for me to be fulfilled. I cannot change the past, but even at my age, with God's help, I can be changed and make something worthwhile of my future.